The night was silent, the kind of silence that pressed against the walls and made every sound louder than it should be. The wind outside howled through the empty streets, rattling old windows and carrying the chill of a world that felt too big for one man alone. Inside a small wooden house, a human sat by the fire, his hands wrapped around a cracked mug of warm tea. He lived alone, and he liked it that way, or at least that was what he told himself every night. But then came the knock. It was soft at first, almost like the wind itself had tapped against his door. He ignored it, thinking it was just his tired mind playing tricks. But then it came again, louder this time, steady and real, a slow, trembling rhythm that made his skin crawl, his heart quickened. Few people ever visited this far from the village, and those who did never came at midnight. He stood, his chair scraping against the wooden floor. His hand went to the weapon on the table, a rusty old rifle that had not fired in months. He crept to the door, every step heavy with suspicion. Another knock came, weak and desperate, and then a voice. "Please, open, please." It was not the harsh growl of raiders or the stern call of soldiers. It was softer, almost broken. He froze, listening harder. The voice carried an accent, alien, gentle, and trembling with cold. He opened the door just a crack, and the sight before him made his breath catch. A woman stood there, tall and thin, her skin a pale shade of silver that glimmered faintly under the moonlight. Her hair clung to her face, wet from the freezing mist. In her arms, she held a small child, and another clung to her leg. Both children had the same silver skin, their eyes glowing faintly like dying stars. The human's hand tightened on the door. His first thought was danger. Aliens had caused too much pain, too much blood in the past. But the woman's eyes, large and wet with tears, held no threat, only fear. "Please," she whispered again, her voice cracking. "My children. They are cold. They are hungry. We have nowhere else to go." The man swallowed hard. Suspicion burned in him like fire. He had heard of tricks. Alien women used to lure men, only for raiders to follow. But something about her trembling hands, about the way the children shivered and pressed close to her, tore at the walls he had built inside. "You shouldn't be here," he said gruffly. "Go back to your people." Her lips trembled. She lowered her head, shame covering her like a cloak. "My people cast us out," she whispered. "They said I was weak, that I was foolish for loving a human once. Now no one will take us in." The words hit him like a blade. A human. She had loved a human before. That explained her broken pride, her desperation. The silence stretched between them, the only sound the whimper of the younger child who buried his face into her shoulder. The man's grip on the door tightened until his knuckles turned white. Letting them in would mean trouble. It would mean whispers from the village, maybe worse. But shutting the door would mean sending them back into the freezing dark, to hunger and death. And then she spoke again, her voice trembling with something more than just cold. "If you let us stay, even for one night, I will do anything. I will warm your bed, human. My children need a father." The words struck him like thunder. His chest tightened. He stared at her, at the children, at the frost clinging to their thin clothes. Suspense and fear tangled inside him. He did not know if he was about to save them or destroy himself. The fire inside his home crackled, warm and alive. Behind the woman was only the endless dark, and he stood caught between both worlds, his hand frozen on the door. The night held its breath, waiting for his choice.
"Hey!"
The man's hand still rested on the door, his heart thundering in his chest. The woman's words echoed inside him, heavy and sharp. "I will warm your bed, human. My children need a father." It was a plea, but also a sacrifice, and he could see the weight of shame in her trembling voice. For a long moment, he said nothing. The silence stretched, broken only by the restless crackle of the fire behind him and the soft sobs of the children clinging to their mother. Finally, he pushed the door open wider, letting the cold night air bite at his skin. "Come in," he muttered, his voice rough, not out of kindness, but out of something deeper he couldn't name. The widow stepped inside, her steps unsteady. The warmth of the fire spread toward her, but could not chase the chill from her body. She guided her children to the floor near the flames, and they curled together like frightened animals, their glowing eyes fixed on the human with a mix of fear and hope. He shut the door behind them, locking it firmly. His gaze stayed sharp, suspicion still burning in his mind. "Speak," he ordered. "Tell me why you are here. Tell me why I should not send you back into the night." The widow lowered herself onto her knees, her silver hair falling over her face. Her hands gripped the fabric of her thin dress, and her voice cracked as she began. "My name is Elira," she whispered. "I had a husband. He was a soldier. He fought when the war swept through our skies. He never came back. His body was left on the battlefield, and with him, my place in the tribe was gone." Her eyes shone with grief. She looked at her children, then back at the man. "We lived in the shadows after that, my people. They do not forgive weakness. They said I was foolish, that my husband's death was proof the stars had cursed us. They drove us out. The homes closed their doors. The families turned their faces away, even Tao. He elders refused to give my children bread." The man's jaw tightened. He had heard stories of the alien tribes, of their cold laws, of their merciless traditions. But hearing it from her lips, seeing her children shiver, twisted the anger inside him. "And why come here?" he asked, his voice sharp. "Why to me?" She lifted her face then, and her eyes locked with his. The silver glow in them was dim, but the firelight made her sorrow clearer. "Because I know humans are different," she said softly. "I once loved a human. Long ago, before the war. He was kind, gentle. He showed me a world beyond cruelty. For that, my people called me a traitor. When he left, I thought I could endure their scorn. But after my husband fell, their hatred grew. I was marked forever as the foolish widow who trusted humans." Her shoulders trembled, her voice grew weaker. "So I came to your kind, to you, hoping that even one human heart still remembers mercy." The children stirred. The older one, barely taller than her waist, stepped forward. His voice was small, broken. "Please, sir, my sister is hungry. We are so cold." The man's chest tightened. He turned away, trying to hide the storm in his eyes. He poured water into a cracked bowl and set it near the children. He broke a piece of bread, hard and stale, but to them it was treasure. They devoured it quickly, their faces lighting up with fragile joy. The widow watched them, tears sliding down her cheeks. "I have nothing to offer but myself," she whispered. "If you take us in, I will work, I will serve, I will warm your bed if that is what you wish. Only please, let my children live." Her words hung heavy in the air. He stared at her, at the quiet desperation painted across her face. Something inside him shifted, a crack forming in the wall he had built to keep the world away. But suspicion lingered still. Could she be a trick, a trap? Or truly a mother on the edge of despair? His hand rested once more on his old rifle, his heart torn between doubt and something dangerously close to compassion. The fire crackled louder, throwing their shadows on the wall. In the flicker of the light, the human saw not just an alien, but a mother fighting for her children, and for the first time in years, he felt the weight of a choice that could change everything. The fire burned low, its glow painting the small room in shifting orange light. The man sat in silence, his rough hands pressed together, as if holding back the weight of his own thoughts. Across from him, the alien widow and her children huddled close to the warmth, their silver skin catching the flicker of the flames. The room was filled with quiet breathing and the crackle of burning wood, yet inside his chest, a storm was raging. He could not shake her words. "I will warm your bed. My children need a father." They circled in his mind, heavy and unsettling. They were not the words of a trickster. They were words of a desperate woman, words that smelled of hunger and shame. But still, his human caution fought against his pity. He leaned back against the chair, his rifle resting against his leg. "You ask for much," he said slowly, his voice carrying both suspicion and weariness. "Do you not know what they will say if I keep you here? The village does not forgive. They hate your kind. They already look at me as if I am cursed." The widow bowed her head, her hair falling like a veil across her face. "I know," she whispered, "but I have nowhere else to go. If you send us out tonight, we will not live to see the sunrise." The human's jaw tightened. He had lived alone for so long, he had learned to keep his distance, to trust no one. It was safer that way, safer to have walls of silence and suspicion. And yet, the image of the children gnawed at him, their tiny hands clutching bread as if it were treasure, their fragile bodies pressed against their mother for warmth. He rubbed his temples, his mind pulling in two directions. If he sent them away, he would have peace. He would not face whispers, he would not face threats from angry men in the village. But he would also hear their cries in his dreams. He would see their faces in the snow, frozen and lifeless. The children shifted, the older one lifting his tired eyes toward the man. "Are we safe here?" the boy asked. His voice was soft, filled with both hope and fear. The question struck the man deeper than any blade. He looked at the boy and then at the widow. She sat with her arms wrapped around the younger child, her body trembling not just from cold, but from fear of rejection, fear that her last hope might crumble before her. "Safe," the man muttered, his throat dry. "For now." The word slipped from his lips before he could stop it. The widow's shoulders shook with relief. She lowered her head, whispering something in her own language, a prayer or perhaps only a thank you, but inside him the storm did not quiet. He wondered if he was a fool, if raiders would come because of her, if neighbors would curse him, if this choice would cost him the little he had left. He rose from his chair, pacing the small room. His boots struck the wooden floor, each step echoing the weight of his thoughts. He glanced at the rifle again, then at the door, then at the fragile figures by the fire. Every instinct told him to choose caution, to choose silence, to close the door to their suffering. Yet something stronger fought inside him, the faint spark of a heart that had not been fully buried. He remembered a night long ago when he too had begged for shelter, when war had chased him from his home. A farmer's family had taken him in, given him bread, given him warmth. They had not asked for payment, only offered kindness. That memory came rushing back, and with it, shame for even thinking of turning her away. The widow's voice broke his thoughts. "I know you do not trust me," she said gently, "and perhaps you never will. But trust this. Everything I do now is for my children. I will not harm you. I will not bring you trouble on purpose. I only wish for them to live." Her words lingered in the air, simple but sharp. He stared at her, and for the first time, he saw not just an alien widow, but a mother carved by grief, carrying two fragile lives in her arms. The fire crackled again, throwing shadows across the walls. He stood still, his heart caught between fear and compassion, torn between the safety of solitude and the risk of opening his door wider. The dilemma consumed him, and though he had spoken the word safe, he knew the real choice still waited, heavy and dangerous. And before the night was done, he would have to decide. The man finally broke his silence, his hand lowered from the rifle, his voice rough but steady. "You can stay," he said, "but only for tonight." The widow's eyes widened, and her lips parted as if to speak, but no sound came. Her children pressed close to her, their small glowing eyes bright with sudden hope. She bowed her head, whispering, "Thank you." Her voice was so faint it was almost lost under the fire's crackle. The man stepped toward the hearth, adding another log to the fire. Sparks leapt upward, filling the room with a stronger warmth. He pointed to a corner near the wall. "You sleep there," he said firmly, "no closer." The widow obeyed, guiding her children to the spot. She spread out the thin fabric she carried, laying her daughter down first, then holding her son close. The children curled together, their bodies trembling as the warmth finally began to touch them. The man sat back down at his table, watching them carefully. He kept the rifle near, his eyes never fully leaving her. He did not trust her, not yet. But seeing the way she held her children, whispering soft words in her strange tongue, carved something inside him he did not want to admit. The widow glanced at him once, her silver hair falling across her face. "Why do you live alone?" she asked softly. Her voice carried no challenge, only curiosity. He looked at her sharply. "Because I choose to," he answered. "People bring trouble. Silence brings peace." She lowered her gaze, stroking her daughter's thin arm. "Peace," she repeated quietly, as if testing the word. "I once dreamed of such a thing, but dreams fade when the world decides you do not belong." Her words sank into him like stones. He turned away, staring at the flames, trying not to let her voice pull too deep. The night dragged on, the house filled with the faint sounds of children breathing. Every creak of the wood, every hiss of the fire seemed louder in the silence. He told himself he would not sleep, that he would watch her until dawn, but the weight of exhaustion pressed against his eyes. As his head dipped, a sound stirred him. The widow was humming, a soft melody that carried sadness and love. It was not in his language, yet the tune wrapped around the room, touching the air like a fragile thread of hope. He pretended not to listen, but inside, something in him stirred. A memory of his own mother's lullabies long ago. He clenched his jaw, shaking the thought away. He could not afford such weakness. Not now, not with danger. One mistake away. Outside, the wind howled, rattling the door. A branch scraped against the window like claws. The man gripped his rifle tighter, his eyes darting toward the sound. The widow's head lifted too, fear flashing across her face. For a moment, they shared the same tension, the same silent question. Was it only the wind, or something worse? The noise faded, leaving only the storm outside. The man exhaled slowly, lowering the rifle but keeping it close. His gaze drifted back to the widow. She had not moved to attack, had not tried to trick him. She only held her children tighter, her body curled protectively around Tiperkinchol. The human rubbed his rough hand over his face, his thoughts heavy. He had given them one night, but even he knew one night would not be enough. If he sent them back into the two cold, they would not last. Yet if he kept them, he would face more than whispers. He would face judgment, hatred, maybe even violence. The firelight danced on the walls, casting their shadows together, his figure rigid and watchful, hers fragile but unbroken. For the first time, the house did not feel entirely empty, and that truth unsettled him more than the dangers outside. The night stretched long, but the choice he had made pressed even longer on his heart. Tomorrow, the village would learn. Tomorrow, the real storm would come. Morning came slowly. The pale light of dawn slipped through the cracks of the old shutters. The fire had burned low, leaving only glowing embers. The man woke first, his body stiff from the chair where he had slept lightly. His hand was still on the rifle, though his eyes had closed without meaning to. The widow was already awake. Her children still slept against her, their small faces peaceful for the first time in many nights. She looked up when the human stirred, her tired eyes holding both caution and gratitude. "You did not send us away," she whispered. Her voice was quiet, as if afraid to disturb the fragile peace of the morning. "Not yet," the man muttered, his voice rough with sleep. He stood, poured water into a cup, and drank. His eyes stayed fixed on her. "But tell me more. I need to know who I have let under my roof." She nodded slowly, brushing her hand across her son's silver hair. "You deserve the truth," she said, "though truth is not always kind." Her voice grew steady as she began. "I was born in the highlands of my people. My tribe was strong, proud. They taught us to honor the stars and to keep our blood pure. But I was different. I did not see purity in walls. I saw chains." She paused, her eyes drifting to the flames. "When I was younger, I met a human. He was not like the warriors of my tribe. He was gentle. He laughed easily. He taught me words in his language. He showed me small things, bread, stories, even how to play with shadows on the wall. I loved him." The human's brows furrowed. He leaned forward slightly, listening in silence. "My people called me foolish," she continued. "They said humans were weak, unworthy. When he left, I thought the pain would pass, but it never did. I carried it like a scar. Later, I married one of my own. He was strong, a soldier. He gave me children. He gave me protection. But war came, and it took him from me. I buried him in my heart. But the tribe, they buried me with him." Her voice cracked, and she looked down at her sleeping children. "They called me cursed. They said the stars punished me for loving a human. They drove me away. I begged. I cried. But they only turned their faces and closed their doors. I was nothing to them. My children were nothing. We were ghosts in our own land." The man clenched his fists. His eyes darkened. He knew cruelty. He had seen it in men, in war. He had felt it in his own loneliness. And yet hearing it in her voice, in the broken rhythm of her words, made his chest ache in a way he did not want to admit. He poured another cup of water and slid it across the table. She looked at it, startled, then lifted it with shaking hands. She drank slowly, whispering, "Thank you." But the human's voice was hard. "Do not thank me yet. You bring danger. If anyone learns you are here, they will come, not with bread, but with stones and fire." The widow lowered the cup, her eyes shimmering. "I know," she said softly, "but I had no choice. I came to you because I remembered what humans once showed me. Kindness. I prayed that at least one would remember still." The children stirred then, blinking awake. Their small voices filled the silence. "Mother, is it morning?" the girl asked. The widow nodded, stroking her daughter's hair. Her son reached for the stale bread on the table, and the man pushed it toward him without a word. The widow watched the simple act with wet eyes. "You see," she whispered, "you are not like them. You are not like my people. You are human, and that still means something." The man turned his face away, hiding the storm in his chest. He wanted to deny her, to remind her that mercy could be dangerous, that kindness could be a blade. But the truth was already planted inside him, growing like fire in the cold. The past she whispered did not only belong to her, it had begun to touch him too. The day stretched longer than usual. The man left the house to fetch water from the well. His steps were heavy, his eyes sharp. He knew the village would notice soon. Someone always watched, someone always whispered. As he filled his bucket, two men approached. Their eyes narrowed, their voices sharp. "We saw tracks near your home," one said. "Small ones, not yours." The man kept his face blank. "Foxes," he replied simply. But their stares lingered, hard and suspicious. By the time he returned home, his chest was tight with unease. The widow sat by the fire with her children. She looked up at him, sensing his silence. "They know?" she asked softly. "Not yet," he muttered, setting the bucket down. "But soon." Later, as the sun fell low, there was a knock on his door. Not desperate this time, but sharp. He opened it to find 3 villagers standing there. Their eyes swept past him, peering into the room, catching sight of silver skin near the fire. One spat on the ground. "So it's true," he growled. "You shelter filth." The human's jaw clenched. He stepped forward, blocking their view. "Leave," he said firmly. But they did not move. Another villager sneered. "We warned you. We told you not to bring trouble here. Now you hide one of them in your house. Do you want raiders at our gates? Do you want sickness? Bad luck." The widow clutched her children close, her eyes wide with fear. She did not speak. She had heard such words. Before, words that cut deeper than blades. The man's voice hardened. "She is a widow with children, nothing more. She is no threat to you." The first villager laughed bitterly. "No threat? They are all a threat. Their kind betrayed us. Their kind killed our people. And you, now you choose them over your own?" The man's grip tightened on the doorframe. He wanted to slam it shut, but he knew it would not end the whispers, not the judgment. The village had already decided. Their eyes burned with hatred, not reason. "Keep her here, and you will pay," one hissed. "We will not carry your curse when it falls. We will not share your shame." With that, they turned, their boots crunching on the frozen dirt, their words trailing behind like a dark cloud. The door closed with a heavy thud. The man leaned against it, his breath sharp. Behind him, the widow's voice shook. "I told you. I bring trouble. If you send us away now, they will leave you in peace." He turned, his eyes fierce. "If I sent you away, you would not live." Her lips trembled, her eyes shining with tears. She looked down at her children, who hid their faces against her. "I never wanted to bring danger to you," she whispered. "I only wanted to keep them alive." The human paced across the room, the fire's glow chasing his shadow across the walls. His mind burned with anger, not at her, but at his own people. He had lived among them for years, had shared their bread, their work, their struggles, yet in one night, they were ready to cast him out for choosing mercy. The widow's soft voice broke the silence. "They will not stop," she said. "Their anger will grow. Soon it will be more than words. They will come again, and next time they will not leave so easily." The man stopped, his hand brushing against the old rifle on the table. He knew she was right. He could already feel the storm gathering, but when he looked at her, at the way she held her children so tightly, as if shielding them with her very soul, something in him refused to bend. "They may come," he said quietly, "but I will not let them take you." Her eyes widened, surprise flashing across her face. "Why?" she asked, her voice breaking. "Why would you risk yourself for us?" The man had no answer, not one he could speak. He only turned back to the fire, his jaw set. His silence was his answer, and it carried more weight than words. The judgment of the village had begun, and soon it would reach its fire. But inside that small wooden house, the human had already chosen his side. The night came heavy and dark. Clouds covered the moon, and the wind rattled the wooden walls of the small house. The man sat awake by the fire, his rifle resting across his knees. He could not sleep, not after the visit from the villagers. He knew words had a way of turning into actions. The widow lay near the corner with her children. They slept lightly, their breaths uneven. She opened her eyes once, her silver gaze meeting his across the fire. For a moment, there was only silence between them, an unspoken fear that both carried. Suddenly, a sound split the night, a crunch of footsteps in the snow outside. The man froze, his body tense. He raised a hand, signaling her to stay quiet. The widow's arms wrapped around her children, pulling them close. The little ones stirred but did not cry, as if they too sensed the danger. Another sound followed, the creak of wood beneath a boot. Then a shadow passed by the window. The man's grip tightened on the rifle. His heart pounded, slow but heavy. The door rattled, not with a knock, but with force. Someone was trying to push it open. A rough voice hissed, "Open up, human! We know what you're hiding!" The widow gasped softly, clutching her children tighter. The man stood, his voice low and hard. "Leave," he warned. "You step inside and you'll regret it." Laughter came from outside, cold and sharp. "Do you think one man can stand against us?" Another voice jeered, "We'll drag her out and you can watch. Maybe we'll sell her to the raiders. Maybe we'll let the children freeze in the snow." The widow buried her face against her children, shaking. The man's blood boiled, rage burned through his fear. He had seen cruelty in war, but hearing it now against a woman and her young filled him with fire. The door shook again, harder this time. The wood groaned under the pressure. The man raised his rifle, aiming at the door. "This is your last warning," he shouted. There was silence for a breath. Then the sound of wood cracking as a blade wedged into the frame. The villagers had not come to talk. They had come to break. The man fired. The blast thundered through the small house. Smoke filled the air, and a scream echoed from outside. The shadows vanished from the window, and hurried footsteps crunched in retreat. The night fell quiet again, but the quiet was different. It was heavy, waiting. The widow looked up at him, her eyes wide. You fought for us," she whispered. He lowered the rifle slowly, his chest rising and falling with deep breaths. "I warned them," he said, his voice rough. "They chose not to listen." The children peeked out from their mother's arms, their glowing eyes fixed on him. The boy whispered, "You saved us." The man turned away, his jaw clenched. He did not want to hear those words. He did not want to feel the warmth that stirred in his chest. He only wanted silence. But the widow rose slowly, her legs weak. She touched his arm lightly. "They will return," she said. "Next time with more men, next time with fire." He looked down at her hand, then at her face. Her fear was clear, but beneath it was something else. Trust. Fragile, but real. "I know," he replied quietly. "But if they come, they will find me waiting." Her eyes filled with tears, not just of fear, but of something softer, as she bowed in at her head, whispering words in her language, words that sounded like prayer. The fire flickered, shadows dancing across the walls. Outside, the snow fell heavier, covering the footprints of those who had fled. But both knew the danger had only begun. Inside that small wooden house, a line had been drawn, and the man had chosen to stand on the side of the widow and her children, no matter the cost. The night slowly faded into morning. The fire had died down to soft embers, and the cold crept back into the small wooden house. The man sat in silence, his rifle still near his hand, his eyes heavy but unyielding. He had not slept, not after the danger that rattled his door. The widow stirred first, her silver hair falling across her face as she sat up. She looked at him with tired eyes, eyes that carried both fear and gratitude. Her children were still curled against her, their small breaths steady. They had slept only because he had kept watch, because he had stood like a wall between them and the world. She whispered softly, "You did not rest." He shrugged, his voice flat. "Someone had to." The widow lowered her gaze, her hands brushing over her daughter's thin arms, as if to check she was still there, still safe. "You saved us," she said again, her voice trembling. "If you had not stood with the rifle, they would have taken me. They would have taken my children." The man's eyes hardened. "I did what had to be done." But inside, he knew it was more than duty. Something had shifted. Something had changed the moment she pressed against the wall, clutching her children, while he pulled the trigger to protect them. He could not name it, but he felt it like a weight in his chest. The children woke soon after. Their eyes searched the room nervously, as if still expecting men to burst through the door. The boy clung to his mother, but when his gaze fell on the human, he whispered, "Father." The word struck the man like a blade. His head snapped toward the child, his brows furrowed. "I am not," he started, but his ice broke before the words could form. He turned away, staring into the cold ashes of the fire. The widow's lips parted, her breath catching. She looked at her son, tears welling in her eyes. She did not correct him. She could not, because deep in her heart, she wished the word was true. The day passed slowly. The man stepped outside once, his eyes scanning the horizon. The village seemed quiet, but he knew it was not peace. It was the silence of men planning, of anger growing. He chopped wood, his axe striking with sharp cracks, each blow echoing the weight of his thoughts. When he returned, the widow had cleaned the table. She had warmed water. She had given the children a wash. Her hands worked without complaint, as if to repay him in the only way she could. He watched her for a moment, his chest tight. Then he muttered, "You do not need to do this." She looked up, her voice steady. "I do. You gave us shelter. I cannot give you gold. I cannot give you land, but I can give you this, my hands, my work, myself." The words lingered between them, heavier than the smoke from the hearth. Later that evening, as the children slept again, the house fell quiet. The widow sat near the fire, her eyes fixed on the flames. The man sat across from her, sharpening his blade slowly. Neither spoke for a long time, yet the silence was not empty. It was filled with something unspoken, something fragile but alive. She broke the quiet at last, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why do you still keep us here, human? You could send us away and be free of danger." He stopped his work, his eyes lifting to hers. The firelight danced in them, hard but not cold. "Because I cannot," he said simply. Her breath caught. Her heart ached at the honesty in his voice. She bowed her head, tears sliding down her cheeks. "Then you are already more than I hoped, more than I prayed for," she whispered. "Ed." The man turned back to his blade, his hands steady. But inside, he felt something break open, something he had buried long ago. The bond between them had grown, not with words, not with promises, but with silence, with danger shared, with lives protected. It was fragile, but it was real. And though neither said it aloud, both knew the truth. After last night, they were no longer strangers. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The man worked outside, cutting wood, gathering water, fixing the fence that leaned against the winter winds. But everywhere he went, he felt the eyes of the village on him. Eyes sharp with judgment, with whispers that followed like shadows. At night, the widow cooked what little food there was. She made broth from scraps, gave the children more than she took for herself. The man noticed, but said nothing. Instead, he watched her, watched the way she moved with quiet strength, watched the way she never once complained. One evening, as the sky turned red with dusk, a knock came again. It was not the desperate knock of the widow, nor the violent pounding of raiders. It was calm, measured, the knock of men who believed they already had power. When the man opened the door, 3 elders of the village stood waiting, their faces lined with age, their eyes cold with certainty. One of them spoke, his voice sharp as a blade. "You must send her away." The man's jaw tightened. "And if I refuse?" "Then you refuse your people," the elder said. "You put all of us at risk. Raiders will come if they smell her kind near. They will bring death, and you will be the one who invited it." The man's grip on the doorframe tightened. His heart pounded. He knew they spoke with the weight of the village behind them. He knew their threats were not empty. The widow stood near the fire, her children clutching her dress. She listened, but she did not speak. Her silence was heavy, her face pale. She already knew what was being demanded. One of the elders sneered. "You are alone. You have no family, no one to defend you. Choose." Be wisely human. Send her back to the cold, or share her curse. The men left their words behind like poison and disappeared into the fading light. The door closed with a hollow thud. The man stood still, staring at the floor. The widow's voice broke the silence, soft but trembling. "They are right," she whispered. "If you send us away, you will be safe. No one will hate you. No one will come to burn your home. You should not throw your life away for us." The man turned toward her sharply. "And if I do?" he asked. "If I send you away, what then? You think I can live knowing you froze in the snow? You think I can sleep knowing your children starved while I sat by my fire?" Her lips parted, but no words came. Tears filled her eyes. She lowered her head. "I never wanted to give you this burden," she whispered. "I only wanted my children to live one more day." The man walked across the room, his boots heavy against the floor. He stopped near the fire, his face hard, but his voice steady. "Listen to me," he said. "I have lived too long in silence. I thought I wanted peace. I thought I wanted to be alone. But the truth is, I was already dead inside these walls, you and your children. You brought life back into this place, and I will not throw that away because cowards whisper outside my door." The widow looked up at him, her breath shaking. Her children clung to her, their glowing eyes wide with wonder. She wanted to speak, to thank him, but her voice broke into tears. The man turned away, staring at the window. His reflection in the glass looked older, heavier. But in his chest, he felt something alive, something that no threat could silence. The decision had been made. He knew the cost, he knew the danger. But his heart had already chosen. And when the storm came, he would face it standing, not alone, but with them. The next morning broke colder than any before. The sky was gray, the air sharp, smoke curled from the chimneys of the village, but inside the man's home the fire burned hotter, brighter. He had made his choice and there was no turning back. The widow rose early, her children still asleep. She moved quietly, her steps light. Her eyes searched the man's face as he stood by the window, staring at the horizon. He had not spoken much since the elders left, but the weight in his shoulders told her everything. "They will come again," she whispered, her voice low. "This time, they will not speak. They will strike." The man turned, his eyes firm. "Let them. I will not bend." She wanted to argue, to tell him to run, to save himself, but the look in his eyes silenced her. It was the look of someone who had lived with loss and loneliness for too long, and had finally found something worth standing for. By midday, the village gathered. The man had seen them forming, voices rising like the rumble of an approaching storm. He opened his door and stepped out, the cold biting his skin. He carried no fear on his face, only steel. The crowd turned to him, men and women, their eyes burning with anger. The elders stood at the front, their words sharp and cruel. "You shame us all," one shouted. "You betray your kind. You risk the lives of your people for filth that does not belong here." The man's jaw tightened. His voice rose above theirs, calm but unyielding. "You speak of shame, but you leave children to die in the cold. You speak of loyalty, but you turn your backs on mercy. If this is what you call strength, then I want no part of it." The words rippled through the crowd. Some sneered, some looked away. But a few shifted uneasily, as if struck by his defiance. The elder stepped forward, his voice like thunder. "Then you stand against us." The man did not hesitate. "I stand for them," he said, nodding toward the house. "The widow and her children are under my roof. My fire keeps them alive. My hand protects them. If you wish to take them, then you must go through me." Gasps spread through the crowd. The boldness of his words was like fire thrown into dry grass. For years he had been silent, a man of little note. Now he stood tall, unbending, his shadow cast long in the winter sun. From inside the house, the widow watched through the crack of the door. Her hands trembled as she held her children close. Tears filled her eyes as she heard his voice carry, strong and fearless. The crowd roared. Some called for him to yield, some for him to be cast out. But he did not move. He planted his feet as if the earth itself held him firm. "I am human," he declared, "and if being human means turning away from the weak, abandoning the broken, then I want none of it. I will not be like you. I will not be less than what I am." His words silenced them for a heartbeat. The cold air carried his defiance like a blade through their pride. Anger flared again, threats spat from lips, but the man's eyes burned brighter than their hatred. He knew he was only one, but in that moment he stood taller than them all. The widow's tears fell silently, not from fear, but from something deeper, hope. For the first time since her world had fallen apart, someone had chosen her children, not out of pity, but out of courage. The stand had been made. The village could break his walls, they could spit their venom, they could even raise their weapons, but they could not unmake his choice. He had declared it to them and to himself. He was no longer just a man in a lonely house. He was their protector, their shield, their father, and nothing, not hate, not fire, not the weight of an entire village, would move him from that stand. The crowd did not forget. The man's defiance spread through the village like sparks in dry grass. Some cursed his name, others warned he had doomed them all, but none dared strike him that day. His voice had been too strong, his stance too firm. Even those who hated him knew they could not break him in the open. Days passed, but the tension grew. The villagers avoided him. Some spat when he walked past. Some muttered words of betrayal, yet he did not falter. Each night he returned to the small house where the widow and her children waited. Each night he sat by the fire, his rifle close, his heart steady. The widow worked quietly. She cooked, she cleaned, she mended his clothes with trembling hands. Her children laughed softly now. Their fear began to fade. They played with scraps of wood near the fire, their glowing eyes bright with life. For the first time, the small house felt less like a cage and more like a home. But danger did not vanish. One night, the sound of voices came again, harsher, angrier. The man stood ready, his rifle in hand. The widow clutched her children. But no attack came, only threats shouted through the dark. When the raiders come, it will be your fault. When death falls, it will be because of them. The man shouted back, his voice like steel. Then let it be on me, not on them. Inside, the widow wept silently, not from fear, but from the weight of what he carried. He had taken their curse as his own, and still he stood tall. Days turned into weeks. The cold began to ease. Spring's breath touched the land. The children grew stronger, laughter more common than tears. The man found himself watching them with quiet pride. His heart softened in ways he had long thought dead. One morning, the boy tugged at his sleeve. "Father, can we go outside?" he asked. The word pierced him again, but this time it did not wound. It filled him with warmth. And he nodded, and together they stepped into the open air. The widow followed, her daughter clinging to her hand. For the first time, the villagers saw them not as shadows, but as a family. The man walking strong, the children running beside him, the widow's eyes lifted with fragile dignity. Whispers followed, sharp and bitter, but also curious. Not everyone saw filth. Some saw something different, something unbroken. That night, as they sat by the fire, the widow spoke softly. "I made you a promise, the night I came," she said, her eyes shining in the glow. "I said I would warm your bed, but I did not mean only with my body. I meant with my life, with my loyalty, with my heart. You have given my children a father. You have given me hope. And if the stars curse us, let them. I will never leave your side." The man looked at her, his chest heavy. For years he had told himself he needed no one, that peace was silence. But now, looking at her and the children, he knew silence had been death. This was life, messy, dangerous, but alive. He reached out, his rough hand covering hers. "Then stay," he said simply. "Stay, and we will face whatever comes together." Her tears fell freely, but her smile broke through them. She leaned close, her children curled safe beside her. And for the first time, warmth filled not just the house, but the hearts within it. They had been cast out, judged and threatened. Yet together they had built something no hatred could break. They were no longer human and alien, widow and stranger. They were family, forged in fire, bound by choice. And in that bond, stronger than the cold, stronger than fear, they found their tomorrow.